Ambassador Hana Lee sat in the Coalition Council chambers and tried not to show her anger. She had been doing this for 200 years now, sitting, listening, smiling, pretending that everything was fine. High Chancellor Velric stood at the center of the Great Hall. His blue skin glowed softly in the light. His voice was calm and kind, like a teacher speaking to a child who had done something wrong. He was talking about humanity again. He was always talking about humanity. The humans on Mars' colony used too much force, Velric said. 3 security guards stopped 2,000 rioters. They used non-lethal weapons, yes, but they were too efficient, too violent. This concerns us, Hana wanted to laugh. Too efficient? 3 people had protected an entire colony from a mob. They had not killed anyone. They had waited 6 hours for help to arrive. But to the Coalition, this was scary. Humans were always too good at fighting. Observer Quell spoke next. He was a Civithian, tall and thin with gray skin and too many eyes. His job was to watch humans and report everything they did wrong. He had a very long list. Human military training exceeds approved levels by 47%, Quell said. He read from his tablet without looking up. Human children play competitive sports. Human entertainment shows violence. We recommend another oversight committee. Another committee. Another group of aliens watching humans, judging them, telling them to be less human. Hana kept her face calm and nodded. Of course, High Chancellor. Humanity will cooperate fully with any investigation. She said the words she always said. The words that kept the peace. The words that hid what humans really were. Back on Earth, Admiral Taman Huang watched the council meeting on his screen. He was 58 years old and had spent 30 of those years commanding the Earth Defense Fleet. He knew every ship the Coalition had. He knew their weapons, their tactics, their weaknesses. He had been studying them since the day Earth joined the Coalition. The Coalition thought they were watching humanity. They did not know humanity was watching them back. Huang turned off the screen. He had work to do. His assistant brought him reports about the new ships being built in the outer colonies. On paper, they were civilian transport vessels. In reality, they were warships. The Coalition had rules about how many military ships Earth could have. They said nothing about civilian ships that happened to have armor and weapons. Humans were very good at following rules. They were even better at finding the spaces between rules. On a training planet far from Earth, Captain Doyen Choi watched alien soldiers practice combat. He was supposed to be learning from them. The Coalition called the Manthari the greatest warriors in known space. They had been fighting wars for 10,000 years. Commander Threxus led her troops through a training exercise. The Manthari moved in perfect formation. They fired their weapons with practiced precision. They executed a flanking maneuver that had won battles for thousands of years. Doyen watched carefully. He made notes. He asked respectful questions. Inside, he was comparing everything he saw to human training. The Manthari were skilled. They were brave. But they fought like they were performing a dance everyone already knew. Human soldiers did not dance. They adapted. They improvised. They treated every fight like it was new because on Earth every fight had been new. When your ancestors spent 200,000 years hunting animals bigger and stronger than themselves, you learned not to rely on old patterns. But Doyen did not say this. He smiled and thanked Commander Threxus for the lesson. He filed his report, making sure to sound impressed. Admiral Huang would read it and understand the truth in the words Doyen did not write. In a laboratory on Earth, Dr. Jiho Kang showed Coalition inspectors around her research facility. She was 36 years old and brilliant. The Coalition thought she studied peaceful things like vaccines and better crops. They approved her work every year. They never saw the 7 levels below ground. They never saw where human scientists studied the most dangerous life forms Earth had created, not to make weapons exactly, just to understand them, to learn from them. The Coalition had banned humanity from researching aggressive biology. They did not understand that on Earth there was no other kind. Every organism on Earth was a survivor of countless extinction events. Every piece of Earth life had learned to fight, adapt, or die. Jiho kept detailed notes in encrypted files. She compared Earth bacteria to alien samples. Earth bacteria won every time. They were faster, tougher, more aggressive. A common Earth cold virus could devastate most Coalition species. The Coalition feared human weapons. They should have feared human biology. 3 months after that council meeting, everything changed. A coalition survey fleet was exploring the edge of known space. They sent a message back to command. Just 4 words. Contact with unknown hostile. Then silence. Another fleet went to investigate. They found nothing. No ships, no debris, no survivors. Just empty space where 900 coalition vessels had been. And something else. Something moving toward coalition space. Something alive. The second fleet managed to send 1 word before they died. Run. The Coalition Council met in emergency session. High Chancellor Velrix called for calm, but Hana could see the fear in his eyes. The Coalition had not fought a real war in 10,000 years. They had forgotten what war meant. Over the next 2 weeks, they learned about the Vrelian swarm. It was a biological horror that consumed everything in its path. Ships, stations, entire planets. It ate matter and converted it into more swarm. It had destroyed 17 galaxies before finding Coalition space. The Coalition assembled the largest fleet in their history. 10,000 ships from 47 different species. They were proud and confident. They had numbers and technology. They would stop this threat like they had stopped every other threat in their peaceful history. Humanity offered to help. High Chancellor Velrix declined. This requires proven warriors, not unpredictable primitives, he said. He did not say it to Hana directly. He did not have to. Everyone knew what he meant. Hana did not argue. She simply made sure that human long-range sensors were recording everything. Knowledge was power, and humanity was about to learn everything the Coalition did not want them to know. The battle lasted 6 hours. The Coalition fleet followed their ancient tactics. They maintained formation. They used coordinated fire. They tried to execute strategic withdrawals when things went wrong. The swarm did not care about tactics. It just consumed. It adapted to energy weapons in minutes. It learned from every attack. It converted destroyed Coalition ships into more swarm biomass. It was not intelligent, not really. It was something worse. It was hungry. Of 10,000 Coalition ships, fewer than 1,000 returned. Commander Threxus barely escaped with her life. She had watched her warriors die with honor, but honor did not stop the swarm. 3 days later, High Chancellor Velrix sent a message to Ambassador Hana. His voice was different now, smaller, afraid. The Coalition requests Earth's assistance in the current crisis. Hana read the message 3 times. Then she composed her response. 2 words, what terms? On Earth, Admiral Huang received notification of the message. He called his senior staff together. Captain Doyen, Colonel Mireille Park, Dr. Jiho Kang, others. They had been preparing for this moment for decades. They are going to ask us to save them, Huang said. They are going to beg us to be the monsters they always said we were. And we are going to do it. But first we make them free us from every chain they put on us. Colonel Park smiled. She had been waiting for this her whole life. She commanded the 5th Drop Legion, 3,000 of humanity's finest soldiers. For 20 years, Coalition observers had watched her train and filed complaints about her aggressive methods. Now those methods were about to save the galaxy. How long until we can deploy? She asked. As soon as they agree to our terms, Huang replied. And they will agree. Because they have no choice. For 150 years, humanity had played nice. They had accepted restrictions. They had endured condescension. They had worn the mask of civilized junior partners in the great coalition of peaceful species. Now the mask was about to come off. The galaxy wanted to see what humans really were. They were about to find out. Earth was a death world. It had tried to kill humanity in every possible way for millions of years. Humanity had not just survived. They had conquered. They had become the apex predator of a planet full of apex predators. And now, finally, they could stop pretending to be anything else. The Coalition Council chamber felt different now. The Grand Hall where aliens had once judged humanity now felt small and desperate. High Chancellor Velrix looked older than his 300 years. Fear did that to people, even aliens who had never known real fear before. Ambassador Hana stood before the council with a list in her hand. Not a request, a demand. 173 treaties restricting human activity would be revoked. Earth would have full command of any joint military operations. Human ships could carry any weapons they chose. And humanity would receive complete access to all coalition technology. The council erupted in anger. Observer Quell stood and shouted about unleashing humanity's worst nature. Other delegates called it blackmail. Some said humans were no better than the swarm. Hana waited for the noise to die down. Then she spoke in a calm, clear voice. You spent 150 years trying to civilize us. You told us we were too violent, too aggressive, too dangerous. Now you face something that does not care about civilization. You need the uncivilized version of humanity. So choose. Let us fight our way or fight the swarm alone. The vote took 3 hours. In the end, desperation won. The council agreed to every term except one. They refused to grant immunity from war crimes prosecution. Some lines, Velric said, must not be crossed even in war. Hana accepted this. She already knew what was coming. Judge us after we save you, she said. Then she sent a single word to Admiral Huang. Approved. Coalition observers arrived at Earth expecting to see 500 human military ships. That was the limit they had set. Instead, they found 8,000 vessels in orbit. Everyone technically legal. Civilian transports, research vessels, colony defense platforms, mining ships, all of them now showing their true nature as warships. Humanity had been building a war fleet in plain sight for a century. They had simply called it something else. Admiral Huang gave the tour personally. He showed the observers ships that looked wrong to alien eyes. No elegant curves or artistic design, just brutal efficiency, armor and weapons and engines designed for one purpose: winning fights. These violate 17 different weapons treaties, Observer Quell said, pointing at kinetic kill vehicles being loaded onto a destroyer. The Council revoked those treaties yesterday, Huang replied with a small smile. Check the Emergency War Powers Act. All restrictions on defensive weapons are temporarily suspended during existential crises. This is an existential crisis. The human fleet departed Earth 3 days later. 8,000 ships carrying weapons the Coalition had banned, tactics the Coalition had condemned, and soldiers trained in methods the Coalition had called excessive. They moved toward the swarm's last known position with cold efficiency. Captain Doyun commanded the carrier Indomitable. His ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Draxer system, where the swarm was consuming a small colony world. Coalition Command suggested careful observation before engagement. Standard procedure, Doyun ignored them. The Indomitable accelerated straight toward the swarm cloud at full speed. Fighter squadrons launched while the carrier was still moving, a maneuver that violated every Coalition safety protocol, but cut response time by 73%. The swarm responded as it always did. Billions of organisms swarmed toward the attackers, ready to adapt and consume. But human weapons did not follow predictable patterns. Each attack was different. Kinetic rounds, then energy beams, then missiles, then magnetic harpoons with nuclear warheads. The swarm tried to adapt but kept encountering new threats. Then the Indomitable fired its main weapon, a railgun that accelerated a 10-ton slug of depleted uranium to nearly half the speed of light. The round hit the densest part of the swarm cloud and converted all that kinetic energy into heat. The fireball vaporized everything within 100 kilometers. Commander Threxus watched from her observation ship. She had fought the swarm before and barely survived. Now she watched humans tear through it like it was nothing. They are not fighting, she whispered. They are hunting. The swarm lost 40% of its local mass in the first engagement. For the first time in recorded history, it began to withdraw. On the Indomitable, Doyun allowed himself a small smile. Tell the Admiral that prey runs when predators attack. Back on Earth, Dr. Jiho Kang studied samples of swarm organisms recovered from the battle. The creatures were impressive. Adaptive proteins, self-repairing structures, distributed neural networks. Coalition scientists were terrified by them. Jiho was not terrified. She was interested. The swarm was dangerous, yes, but it had evolved in sterile intergalactic space, consuming dead matter. It had never faced Earth life. It had never faced organisms that evolved in a constant biological arms race lasting billions of years. She introduced swarm tissue to common Earth bacteria. The swarm tried to adapt, it failed. Earth bacteria had been defeating immune systems since before complex life existed. She introduced swarm tissue to Earth viruses, common cold variants. The swarm tried to expel them. The viruses mutated faster than the swarm could respond. Finally, she introduced swarm tissue to engineered Earth fungus. The fungus infiltrated the swarm's neural networks and began taking control. Within hours, the swarm sample was dead, converted to inert biomass. Jiho sent a message to Admiral Huang. The swarm consumed 17 galaxies because it never met Earth life. We are about to teach it what invasive species means. The first ground engagement happened on Talvex 4, a world the swarm was actively consuming. Coalition Command questioned the wisdom of landing troops on an infested planet. You cannot fight biology with soldiers, they said. Colonel Mireille Park ignored them. Her 5th Drop Legion deployed directly into the thickest swarm concentrations. 3,000 soldiers against a living ocean of hostile organisms. It looked like suicide. Then Coalition observers saw what human infantry actually meant. Sergeant Huenbeck and his squad moved through the swarm like water, their powered armor enhancing already incredible reflexes. They carried weapons that shifted modes every few seconds. Fire, then acid, then cold, then sound. The swarm could not adapt fast enough. More importantly, they worked as packs. When swarm organisms isolated individual humans, they did not find prey. They found bait. The soldiers used themselves as lures, drawing swarm forces into prepared positions where overlapping fire destroyed them. Commander Threxus watched from orbit and finally understood. This is not modern warfare. These are tactics 50,000 years old. This is how they hunted mammoths, how they killed predators bigger and stronger than themselves. They are using the same methods. In 18 hours, the 5th Drop Legion cleared the planet's primary continent. They lost 47 soldiers. By human standards, that was acceptable. By coalition standards, it was a miracle. Any coalition force would have lost thousands. Colonel Park requested permission to deploy to the next infested world. Admiral Huang granted it immediately. News of human victories spread across coalition space. After weeks of continuous defeat, the swarm was being pushed back. 3 systems had been completely liberated. The advance had stopped. Hope returned to the galaxy, but with hope came fear. Coalition citizens watched the battle footage. They saw humans using weapons that had been banned for 10,000 years. They saw soldiers who seemed to enjoy combat. They saw tactics that ignored civilian safety protocols. They saw efficiency that looked like brutality. Observer Quell compiled his reports. Every human excess was documented. The use of biological weapons, the deployment of AI-controlled systems, the casual acceptance of casualties, the joy some humans showed in battle. His reports filled database after database. High Chancellor Velrix read these reports with growing dread. He had asked humanity to help. They had come, but the creatures fighting the swarm were not the diplomatic humans he thought he knew. These were predators who had finally been given permission to hunt. Commander Threxus had a different reaction. She requested permission to train with human forces. When questioned, she said simply, "For 10,000 years we practiced war as ritual. They practice it as survival. I want to learn." Ambassador Hana watched all of this from Earth. She could see what was coming. The moment when the Coalition realized they had not unleashed a weapon against the swarm, they had unleashed humans. And there was a reason the galaxy had feared humans. Now they were remembering why. Admiral Huang issued new orders to the fleet. The defensive phase was over. Human forces would now take the offensive. They would not just push the swarm back. They would hunt it down and destroy it completely. Because that was what you did with existential threats on a death world. You eliminated them entirely. The Coalition wanted humanity to save them. Humanity would do exactly that. But salvation would look different than the Coalition expected. It would be brutal and efficient and terrifying, because that was the only way humans knew how to fight. When Earth had spent millions of years trying to kill your species, you learned to take no chances. You learned to finish threats completely. The mask was off. The galaxy was finally seeing what humans really were, and they were learning that Deathworld natives did not play gentle when survival was at stake. Admiral Huang stood before the holographic display showing the Korvax Nebula. This was where the Coalition had suffered their worst defeat. This was where the swarm had established its largest stronghold in Coalition space. 36 worlds had been consumed here. Now it would become the site of humanity's first major offensive. He called the operation Extinction. Coalition Command suggested a careful approach. Test the defenses, probe for weaknesses. Standard doctrine for a prudent military force. Huang had a different plan. Hit them with everything at once. 5 battle groups, 2,000 ships converging from different directions. No warning, no mercy. Overwhelming force applied at the enemy's strongest point. Observer Quell protested. "This is reckless. You are risking the entire human fleet." Huang looked at him calmly. "We are not risking it. We are using it. There is a difference between having a military and being willing to employ one. You will learn this difference today. The human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect coordination. 5 battle groups appeared simultaneously at different points around the nebula. The swarm responded instantly, billions of organisms swarming toward the new threats. Captain Doyen's carrier group struck first. 500 fighters launched and immediately dispersed into seemingly random patterns. The swarm tried to intercept but kept finding empty space. Human pilots did not fly where targeting computers predicted they would be. Then the capital ships opened fire, not careful targeted strikes. This was saturation bombardment, thousands of missiles, railgun slugs, energy beams, so much ordnance that dodging became impossible. The swarm could only absorb the damage and try to adapt, and adapt it did. Swarm organisms developed resistance to kinetic impacts. Others evolved energy-absorbing tissues. The hive mind calculated optimal defensive formations. This was what had defeated 17 galaxies. The swarm learned and evolved in real time. Then Dr. Kang's bioweapons deployed. Warheads containing weaponized Earth bacteria, strains specifically engineered to target swarm neural tissues. The organisms tried to adapt. They had adapted to every other threat in their existence. But Earth bacteria had billions of years of practice overwhelming immune systems. They were not trying to infect the swarm. They were waging war at a cellular level using tactics perfected over epochs. The swarm's coordination began to fragment. 6 hours into the battle, the critical moment arrived. The swarm, despite massive losses, still outnumbered human forces by 1,000 to 1. It began to envelop the human fleet using its signature tactic, pure overwhelming biomass. Coalition observers watching from safe distance predicted disaster. This was how the swarm always won, by drowning enemies in endless waves. Admiral Huang watched his tactical display and smiled. The swarm was doing exactly what he had predicted. It was not intelligent. It was instinctive. And instincts could be exploited. He ordered the fleet to contract into a tight defensive sphere. The swarm sensed victory and converged from all directions. Its biomass formed a living shell around the human forces, preparing to crush them. Then every human ship activated weapons humanity had been forbidden to develop. Antimatter warheads, not fired outward, detonated in place. The explosions did not destroy the human fleet. They were protected by advanced shields activated at the exact moment of detonation, but the swarm surrounding them completely absorbed the full force of 200 antimatter explosions. 80% of the Korvax swarm was vaporized instantly. The human fleet, damaged but intact, emerged from the firestorm to eliminate survivors. Commander Threxus watched from her observation post. Her voice was barely a whisper. They used themselves as bait. They let the swarm surround them. They turned the swarm's greatest strength into its weakness. Observer Quell said nothing. He was too busy updating his report. Another 300 violations of coalition military ethics. Use of banned antimatter weapons. Deliberate risk to personnel. Tactics that prioritized results over safety. The list went on and on. The human fleet regrouped after the battle. 237 ships lost. 15,000 personnel dead. By human standards, a costly victory. By coalition standards, where they had lost 9,000 ships in their first engagement, it was impossible. Captain Doyen walked through the medical bay of the Indomitable. Injured crew members lay in rows of beds. Most would survive. Human durability amazed coalition observers. Injuries that would kill most species resulted in humans requesting to return to duty. Admiral Huang addressed his forces over the fleet-wide communication system. We won because we were willing to do what the coalition would not. We risked everything, and that risk paid off. Some will call us reckless. Others will call us monsters. Let them. We are alive, and so are the billions we are protecting. On coalition worlds, debate raged. Yes, humanity had won. But at what cost to morality? The use of antimatter weapons? The casual acceptance of casualties? The apparent enjoyment some humans had displayed in combat footage? High Chancellor Velrix convened an emergency ethics committee. Observer Quell presented 147 documented violations of coalition military ethics. The evidence was overwhelming. Ambassador Hana listened to the accusations. Then she asked a single question. Would you prefer we lost? No one had a good answer. While politicians debated ethics, Colonel Park led the largest ground operation in human history. 50,000 Drop Legion soldiers deployed across 12 infested worlds. Their mission was simple: eliminate all remaining swarm presence, secure the worlds for recolonization. Coalition forces requested joint operations. Commander Threxis personally led a Manthari division alongside human troops. Within days, she understood the fundamental difference between coalition and human warfare. Manthari warriors were brave and skilled, but they fought like soldiers following a manual. Humans fought like humans, which meant they fought like persistence predators who had spent 200,000 years learning to kill things larger, faster, and stronger than themselves. Sergeant Hyun Baek demonstrated this difference when his squad encountered a massive swarm nest. Standard tactics would require days to clear it. Instead, they studied it for 3 hours, identified patterns in the swarm's behavior, then exploited those patterns. The nest collapsed in 90 minutes. "You are not following any tactical manual," Threxis observed. Hyun smiled. "We wrote the tactical manuals. That is why we know when to ignore them." Threxis requested permission to embed permanently with human forces. Back on her homeworld, Manthari strategists began studying human tactics. They were simultaneously horrified and impressed. Humans did not follow rules. They followed results. In her laboratory on Earth, Dr. Kang achieved what coalition observers called a terrifying breakthrough. She had weaponized Earth's entire ecosystem against the swarm. Her bioweapon was not a single organism. It was a carefully balanced cocktail of Earth bacteria, viruses, and fungal spores. Each component attacked different aspects of swarm biology. The bacteria targeted structural proteins. The viruses infiltrated neural networks. The fungi hijacked reproductive systems. More terrifying, the bioweapon evolved. Each generation became more effective against swarm defenses. The swarm had adapted to consume 17 galaxies. Now it faced organisms that adapted faster. Coalition bioethicists visited her lab. "You have created a self-evolving weapon," one protested. "What if it mutates beyond your control?" Kang's response was simple and chilling. "It will not. Earth bacteria have been evolving inside humans for millions of years. We coexist because we learned to. The swarm will not learn. It only knows consumption," she demonstrated by introducing swarm tissue to her bioweapon. Within hours, the swarm tissue became inert biomass. The bioweapon then went dormant, waiting for more swarm material. "You are planning to deploy this?" Observer Quell asked, horrified. "Already have," Kang replied. "Every human ship carries spore pods. Every swarm world we have touched is now infected. It just takes time to spread." She saw the horror in the observers' faces. "You wanted us to stop the swarm. This is how you stop something that adapts. You give it something that adapts faster. Welcome to Evolution, Coalition. Earth wrote the rules. Push the swarm back across 17 systems. Every battle followed the same pattern. Humans used overwhelming force, adapted faster than the swarm could counter, and accepted casualties that would devastate coalition forces. The swarm, for the first time in its existence, was losing, not just being pushed back. Actually losing. Worlds it had consumed were being sterilized by human bioweapons. Its ability to adapt was being outmatched by Earth life that had been adapting for billions of years. Admiral Huang watched the strategic map and knew the truth. The swarm was not just retreating, it was dying, and humanity was the reason why. But victory would come with a price. Every battle added to Observer Quell's reports. Every weapon used was another violation. Every tactic employed was another mark against humanity in the eyes of coalition ethics committees. The galaxy was being saved. But the saviors looked more like monsters with every passing day. And that, Admiral Huang knew, was exactly the problem. The coalition wanted to be saved. They just did not want to see how salvation worked. Too bad. The mask was off. Humanity was showing the galaxy what Deathworld natives really looked like when they stopped pretending. The strategic map of coalition space told a story that seemed impossible 3 months ago. The swarm was retreating. 17 systems had been completely liberated. The invasion that had consumed billions of lives across 17 galaxies had been stopped. By humans. By one species from one Deathworld. High Chancellor Velrix should have been celebrating. Instead, he sat in his private chamber and felt fear growing in his chest. Not fear of the swarm anymore. Fear of what the coalition had unleashed to stop it. Observer Quell had presented his latest report. 437 documented violations of coalition military ethics. Use of weapons banned for 10,000 years. Tactics that ignored civilian safety. Soldiers who seemed to enjoy combat. And worst of all, the complete annihilation of an entire species, because that was what humanity was planning. Admiral Huang had proposed tracking the swarm back to its origin point and destroying it there. Not defeating it, not pushing it back. Complete extinction, Coalition Command had called it insane. The swarm's origin was outside the known galaxy, possibly in the void between galaxies. No Coalition fleet had ever ventured that far. The logistics were impossible. Huang had smiled that cold smile of his. Your logistics are impossible. Ours are merely difficult. And now a human strike force of 500 ships was preparing to leave known space. Captain Doyen had volunteered immediately. Colonel Park had requested ground forces be included. Dr. Kang had provided bioweapons designed to spread through whatever ecosystem spawned the swarm. Observer Quell had filed an emergency protest. This violated 23 different treaties regarding genocide. Humanity was planning to annihilate an entire species. This was exactly what the Coalition had spent 10,000 years preventing. Huang had not denied it. Yes, that is exactly what we are planning. That is what you do with existential threats on a death world. You eliminate them completely. The swarm consumed 17 galaxies. Would you prefer we let it consume 18? The Council, desperate and afraid, had authorized the mission. What choice did they have? The human fleet departed 3 weeks later. They traveled through absolute void for weeks. No stars, no planets, just empty space between galaxies. Other species would have been psychologically devastated by the isolation. Humans found it peaceful. Commander Threxus, embedded with the fleet as an observer, asked Sergeant Hyun why humans seemed comfortable in such a hostile environment. His answer was typically human. Our ancestors crossed ice ages and deserts with primitive technology. This is just another journey into the unknown. We are good at those. Then sensors detected it. A rogue planet drifting in the intergalactic void, 3 times the size of Earth and covered completely in swarm biomass. This was the source. The swarm had not invaded from another galaxy. It had evolved in the dark between galaxies, consuming dead worlds until it grew large enough to threaten living ones. Admiral Huang studied the planet for 3 hours. Then he issued a single word: burn. What followed was not a battle. It was systematic annihilation. The human fleet surrounded the planet and began bombardment from every angle simultaneously. They used everything. Kinetic weapons that shattered continents, fusion warheads that boiled oceans, antimatter devices that cracked the planet's crust. This was human warfare with all restraints removed. And it was terrifying in its efficiency. The swarm fought back with everything it had. Billions of organisms launched from the surface. They adapted and evolved and employed tactics that had worked against 17 galaxies. None of it mattered. Colonel Park's drop legions landed on the surface. They deployed Dr. Kang's ultimate bioweapon. Engineered organisms from Earth's deepest ocean trenches, modified to consume swarm biomass and convert it to inert carbon. They spread through the swarm's underground networks like wildfire. Within 72 hours, the swarm homeworld was dead. Not defeated, dead. Every organism converted to lifeless matter. The planet itself cracked by orbital bombardment. Humanity had made certain there was no chance of the swarm re-emerging. Commander Threxus watched from orbit. She finally understood what Deathworld really meant. It was not just that Earth was dangerous. It was that Earth had taught humans how to be dangerous, how to identify threats and eliminate them completely, without mercy or hesitation, because that was how you survived when extinction was always one disaster away. The human fleet returned to Coalition space as heroes. News of their victory spread before they even arrived. The swarm was gone. The threat that had consumed 17 galaxies had been eliminated. Celebration erupted across thousands of worlds, but the celebration was muted by fear. When Coalition forces reviewed the combat footage, they saw the complete destruction of an entire species. They saw humans moving through swarm territory like ancient predators, efficient and remorseless. They saw what salvation looked like when Deathworld natives provided it. Observer Quell presented his final report to the Coalition Council. 437 violations of military ethics, deployment of banned weapons, use of weapons of mass destruction, planned genocide of a sentient species. His recommendation was clear. Humanity must face war crimes prosecution. High Chancellor Velrix read the report with a heavy heart. Humanity had saved them. But the creatures who returned from the dark were not the diplomatic partners who had left. They were apex predators who had remembered how to hunt, and they had enjoyed it. Ambassador Hana received notification of pending charges. She was not surprised. She had known this was coming from the moment the Council authorized the mission. The galaxy had wanted humanity unleashed. Now it had to face what that meant. The tribunal began 2 weeks later. Thousands of species watched as humanity stood accused of crimes that had saved their civilizations. The irony was not lost on anyone. The prosecutor presented damning evidence. Video footage of planetary bombardment, records of bioweapon deployment, testimony from observers documenting human joy in combat. The case was overwhelming. Humanity had violated every principle the Coalition held sacred. Admiral Huang served as humanity's spokesperson. He did not deny the charges. Instead, he asked a single question. Would you have preferred we lost? The prosecutor responded that victory did not justify violations of fundamental ethical principles, that there were some lines that should not be crossed even in war. That civilization meant maintaining standards even in crisis. Huang's response was brutally simple. You wrote those ethical principles on garden worlds, where the worst predator was already extinct before your species developed agriculture. We wrote ours on Earth where everything tried to kill us. Your ethics work in peacetime. Ours work in war. He looked around the chamber at the assembled species. You asked us to stop being gentle. You asked us to embrace our nature as Deathworld natives. We did. This is who we are when we are not pretending to be something else. If that horrifies you, perhaps you should not have asked. The council chambers erupted in argument. Some demanded punishment. Others called for understanding. Many simply sat in silence, trying to process what they had learned about their saviors. Commander Threxis spoke as an observer. She had fought alongside humans. She had watched them work. Her words were simple and devastating. Then judge them. But do it after you find someone else who can protect you from the next threat. Because there will be a next threat. There always is. The tribunal adjourned without a verdict. The council needed time to decide. Could they live with what humans were now that the mask had been removed? Could they prosecute the species that had saved them? Could they trust predators to protect them? Ambassador Hana returned to Earth to wait. She met with Admiral Huang in his office overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The same ocean where humanity's ancestors had first learned to fish, where they had developed tools and language and all the things that made them human. What do you think they will decide? She asked. Huang watched the waves for a long moment. They will decide that they need us more than they fear us. Not because they want to, because they have no choice. The universe is hostile. We have always known this. Now they know it too. And if they choose, then we remind them that we did not need their permission to build our fleet. We did not need their authorization to develop our weapons. We played by their rules because it was convenient. But we do not need them. They need us, Hana nodded slowly. She had spent 200 years being diplomatic, playing the role of junior partner, accepting insults and restrictions with grace. It felt strange to be done with all that, to finally show the galaxy what humans really were. Do you think we went too far? She asked quietly. Huang turned from the window. No, we went exactly as far as necessary. The swarm would have consumed the entire galaxy. We stopped it. The method does not matter. Only the result. That is a very human way of thinking. Yes, Huang agreed. It is, and it is why we won. Across Coalition space, the debate continued. But everyone knew the truth. Humanity had removed their mask. The galaxy had seen what Deathworld natives really looked like. There was no going back to the old relationship. Everything had changed. The question was not whether humans were dangerous. Everyone knew they were. The question was whether the galaxy could learn to live with dangerous protectors. Whether they could accept that salvation sometimes wore a monster's face. The answer, woe. 3 weeks after the tribunal began, High Chancellor Velrix called an emergency session of the full Coalition Council. Every species sent representatives. Every world watched. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to learn humanity's fate. The council was divided into 3 groups. Some demanded humanity face punishment for war crimes. Others argued humanity should be pardoned for saving the galaxy. A growing third group wanted something different. They wanted humanity permanently granted special military status. Observer Quell delivered his recommendation. Humanity should be found guilty but pardoned, with new oversight mechanisms to prevent future excesses. It was a compromise that satisfied no one. Before Velrix could announce the decision, Ambassador Hana requested to speak. What she said changed everything. "You are asking the wrong question," she began. Her voice was calm but carried through the chamber. "You are debating whether to punish us for being what you needed us to be. Instead, you should be asking this. What happens when another threat emerges?" She let that sink in. "Because the swarm will not be the last existential crisis the galaxy faces. When the next one arrives, you will need us again. And we will need to know, will you chain us until crisis strikes, then unleash us and prosecute us afterward? That is not a partnership. That is abuse." The chamber fell silent. She had exposed the fundamental problem. The Coalition wanted humanity's protection, but not humanity's nature. They wanted to be saved without seeing how salvation worked. After 3 more weeks of debate, a new agreement emerged. The Deathworld Accords. Humanity would be officially designated as the Coalition's apex defense force. They would have authorities and restrictions that reflected their unique nature. The terms were complex but fair. Human military forces would maintain their full strength. They would operate under joint command during coalition-wide crises. Humans would train coalition forces in Deathworld tactics. In exchange, humanity gained full council representation and access to all coalition technology. Most importantly, humanity would be exempt from certain military ethics protocols during existential crises, but only when the council unanimously agreed a true existential crisis existed. It was not perfect, but it was realistic. Admiral Huang reviewed the terms and found them acceptable. The galaxy had learned that you could not civilize away survival instincts, but you could channel them. You could work with predators. It just required respect, not restraint. 6 months after the war ended, the galaxy began to rebuild. Worlds consumed by the swarm were being reseeded with life. And surprisingly, humanity led many reconstruction efforts. Colonel Park supervised the rebuilding of so terrifying in combat, worked alongside coalition engineers with remarkable patience. When Observer Quell expressed surprise at their, "We are good at breaking things," she said. "We are also good at building them. Earth taught us both. You cannot survive a death world without learning to create as well as destroy." Dr. Kang worked with coalition scientists to ensure her bioweapons were completely contained. The engineered organisms had served their purpose. Now they needed to be controlled. It was delicate work, but she approached it with the same intensity she had brought to their creation. Captain Doyen attended ceremonies across dozens of worlds, receiving medals and honors. He was celebrated as a hero, and quietly feared. He understood. Fear and respect were often inseparable. He did not mind. 1 year after the war, the first Joint Coalition Human Military Academy opened. Commander Threxus oversaw the training program. Young coalition officers learned alongside human instructors. The culture shock was significant. A young Kelthran cadet asked Sergeant Hyun why humans practiced such aggressive tactics. Hyun, now an instructor, explained patiently, "Because on our world everything was a threat. We did not develop agriculture until we had already learned to kill apex predators with primitive weapons. By the time we reached space, we had survived ice ages, plagues, and nuclear war. We are not aggressive. We are survivors." The cadets struggled with human training methods, the emphasis on adaptation over doctrine, the acceptance that plans would fail and success required improvisation, the understanding that sometimes there were no good choices, only survivable ones, but gradually they learned. Not to become human. That was impossible. But to understand why humans thought the way they did, to appreciate that death world logic, while brutal, was also practical. Threxus watched a training exercise where mixed teams faced simulated threats. For the first time, she saw genuine cooperation. Coalition forces provided strategic thinking and technological innovation. Humans provided tactical flexibility and aggressive execution. Together, they were formidable. Then came the news that made everyone remember why the Accords mattered. A long-range sensor station detected anomalous readings from intergalactic space. Something was moving in the void. Multiple somethings. Initial analysis suggested organized intelligence moving with purpose toward coalition space. The report reached Admiral Huang within hours. He studied the data with calm focus. The signatures did not match the swarm, but They did match something else, intelligence, something, had heard what happened to the swarm and was coming to investigate. He contacted Ambassador Hana with a simple message. Tell the council we may have another situation developing. Hana convened an emergency session. High Chancellor Velrix received the news with visible dread. Another threat so soon? Huang's response was characteristically pragmatic. The universe is hostile. We told you that. But now you have something you did not have before. You have us, and we are very good at surviving hostile environments. This time there was no debate about humanity's role. They were the apex defense force. It was literally their job. The council authorized immediate defensive preparations. Mixed human coalition fleets moved to intercept positions. Training academies accelerated their programs. On Earth, Admiral Huang stood before a display showing coalition space. Newly constructed defense stations marked key strategic points. Joint fleets patrolled the borders. The galaxy was preparing for whatever came next. Ambassador Hana joined him, reviewing reports from recent council sessions. Do you think they truly understand now what it means to be from a death world? Huang considered this carefully. Some do, Threxis understands. Others are learning. Most still fear us, but it is a different fear now. Not of the unknown, but of the known. They understand we are dangerous, but they also understand we are dangerous for them, not to them. And this new threat, we will handle it. That is what we do. Earth taught us to survive against impossible odds. The Coalition gave us the resources and motivation to survive on a galactic scale. Whatever is coming, we will adapt. Across Coalition space, crews prepared for the unknown. Human drill sergeants trained alien recruits. Coalition scientists worked with human engineers on new defense systems. Former adversaries became partners in survival. On dozens of worlds, children studied together, human and alien. They learned Earth's history and Coalition philosophy. They trained in both Garden World ethics and Death World pragmatism. They were the first generation to grow up after the mask came off. Observer Quell, no longer quite so horrified by human methods, wrote his final assessment. He concluded that humanity was not the threat the Coalition had feared. They were something more complex. A species that embodied both the galaxy's darkest possibilities and its greatest hope for survival. They were proof that evolution on a hostile world created not monsters, but survivors. And sometimes the galaxy needed survivors more than it needed saints. In the end, the galaxy learned what humanity had tried to tell them from the beginning. You feared us when we played nice because you sensed what was underneath. Now you have seen us embrace our true nature as Deathworld natives. And you have learned that nature is both terrifying and necessary. The threats would keep coming. They always did. The universe was hostile, but now the galaxy had something it never had before. Apex predators who hunted for the pack, not against it. Dangerous protectors who understood that survival sometimes required brutal efficiency. Humanity did not stop being dangerous. They just found a galaxy worth protecting, and the galaxy, slowly, was learning to accept its guardians for what they were. Not gentle, not civilized in the way Garden World species understood civilization, but loyal, effective, unstoppable. Admiral Huang watched the strategic display and allowed himself a small smile. The mask was off. The galaxy had seen humanity's true face, and they had chosen to stand beside them anyway. It was not the relationship humanity had been forced to accept for 150 years. It was better. It was honest. And honesty, Huang had learned long ago, was the foundation of real strength. The future would bring new challenges, new threats, new opportunities to prove that Deathworld natives had more to offer than violence. They had resilience. They had adaptability. They had the hard-won knowledge that survival required both the strength to fight and the wisdom to protect. Ambassador Hana stood beside Huang and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, something was coming. But the galaxy was ready now. They had humanity. And humanity had shown them something important. You did not have to be the strongest to survive. You had to be the most adaptable, the most persistent, the most willing to do what was necessary.